unpacking today's headlines. This is Souls and Liberty in Depth.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to this edition of Souls and Liberties in Depth, where we do in-depth conversations and always have great guests for you. And this one is about the delusional Democrats and kind of how they're kind of talking to themselves in this echo chamber. Probably not advancing anywhere, and I can't think of a better person to address any of this than Mark Mitchell from Rasmussen Reports. Mark has been on the show quite a few times, and always great pleasure to have him on, always insightful conversations, all that. So welcome back, Mark.
Yeah, really great to be here. A lot of weird stuff going on, a lot of conflicting signals, so hopefully we can get to the bottom of it.
Yeah, I think one of the things we want to get into, as we talked about, was this particular article. I think, Adrian, you have that if you want to pop it up on the screen for the viewers. This particular article from, so this is one of the enemy camps, Unheard. And they're always producing rabid, everything's right with the world except for Donald Trump. And if you back Donald Trump, then something's wrong with you. And and our polling from CNN and Gallup and everybody else says this and that. This particular headline, as you can see, is Why Democrats Are Down, Opposing Trump Can Unite a Splintered Left. Why Democrats are down. It's all they have to do is just oppose Trump. That's essentially what their research shows here. So, Mark, one of the things in here, and particularly why I wanted you to come on and talk about this, is because the vast weight of this particular article as the support of its conclusion is based on pointing at polling. Before we get into this specifically, and here's another chance for you guys to plug your group of four accurate pollsters. Go ahead and do a little shameless self-promotion on that for a moment, and then tell us what the problem is with looking at just some of the polls, particularly the polls the left conducts, blabs on about, and is constantly trying to psyop people with their results.
Well, let me first start in saying that I've done this enough to know that there's no such thing as a right-wing pollster, because the left-wing pollsters are a factor of the fact that money wants to make the left win. Money doesn't really want to make the right win. It just doesn't work that way. There are some Republican pollsters, and if anything, they underemphasize their candidates' results so that they can get more money by doing more polling. And so we do have an organization called the National Association of Independent Pollsters that we launched back on July 4th. It's us, Rich Barris, the People's Pundit, Robert Cahaley at Trafalgar, and Matt Towery at Insider Advantage. We all know and respect each other's work because we're trying to be accurate. You said the unheard people are the enemy camp. Well, basically, they're the enemy of truth, because I immediately look at the stuff that Richard guy's writing, and it's, he's referring to things that are not the cream of the crop. The very first thing he does is starting to talk about G. Elliott Morris. Well, G. Elliott Morris is a disgusting little ideologue that was put in charge of 538 and immediately ran it into the ground by doing things like kicking out Rasmussen Reports. Now, if anybody follows us, they know that we equally hate the Democrat and Republican parties and rip on them both because they've been a barrier to getting voters what they want. So that's my politics. I'm not a right winger. I'm I guess a representative democracy kind of guy. And so if you look at the stuff that G. Elliott Morris puts out, well, he does his own polling, and I can tell you his first polling into the field with the failed Monmouth University people had Trump underwater 16 when we had him up like 4 or 5 points. So this guy's 20 points to the left of us with Trump net approval. And then if you look at who he's aggregating, it's a bunch of left-wing pollsters, like basically the Data for Progress and Quinnipiac and all this other stuff. So they've created this artificial polling world. One of his articles showed that the big beautiful bill was underwater like between 23 and 31 points based on all these pollsters he's referring to, ABC, Washington Post, Ipsos, Economist, YouGov. We had the big beautiful bill up 5. So They're literally creating a reality and then packaging it and giving it to their followers that is 30 points to the left of where we have reality. But what's weird is that also in this first paragraph, he's like, oh, look at Quinnipiac. Here's the Democrat Party at negative 19 point, or what did they have him? A 19-point favorability for the Democrats. 33 points, I think, was another poll they referred to, CNN maybe. The last time I did Democrat favorability 2 weeks ago, it was at 47%. So which do you think is more correct? That Kamala Harris lost and some people are kind of mad and their party's a little bit of a national mess, but the Democrats haven't really gone anywhere and they still plan on voting for Democrats because they've been taught that the right is a bunch of Hitlers that don't respect democracy, or that somehow every Democrat is actually super introspective. And so I can tell you they're creating a false reality of the Democrats being horribly unapproved of. And I think it's because of internal power stuff. They're trying to reform their party. People are trying to get to the head of the, like they're trying to motivate people, I guess. I don't know. Maybe it's about fundraising. I really don't know, but it's fake. And so I think you can basically discount everything else this guy says. Now, their national leadership.
Hold on a second there, because that's one of those headlines. Because if you go out, and heck, I've done commentaries on it. If you go out and look at anything in the social media / even legacy media news worlds, it's the Democrats are in straits they've never found themselves in. Jaws is coming after them. Moby Dick has already devoured half of them. They're gone, done, buried, a footnote in history. And you're saying, yo, boys, not so fast here. They're actually just about where they were before.
Well, look at it this way. Republicans were leading, not just in my polling, but in the Real Clear Politics aggregate last fall in the generic ballot, and they won the House National Popular Vote by like 3 points, right? Mm-hmm. Well, now the Democrats are leading in the generic ballot. I have Democrats up 4, and the Real Clear Politics aggregate, I think, is up 3. So Democrats are winning. So how do Democrats win when only 19% of the country has a favorable impression of them? Oh, it's because you quoted Quinnipiac, and that's just loony. You shouldn't do that. It's clown polling. And so people do that a lot, unfortunately, because really the biggest way that lying is done with polls is by cherry picking, taking things out of context, or, Newsweek does this all the time. Basically, when my numbers show Trump's dropping, they'll run an article about how Trump's best pollster shows that Trump's dropping. And then when Quinnipiac has him dropping, they'll quote Quinnipiac. And then when somebody else, so what you have is every week there's an article about how Trump's approval rating is dropping. And so they continue to do this. And there's some sophisticated stuff they pull, like that PSYOP I think we talked about on your show, that everybody dropped a really bad poll for Donald Trump a weekend before his 100-day mark, just so ABC could put out a headline that he has the worst polling in 80 years of any president at his 100-day mark. Well, okay, but his polling has actually been, up until about a few weeks ago, better than everybody but Obama first term. And he was about to cross Obama first term until he stepped in a couple of hornet's nests. So it's all lying, and these people are lying too. And it's probably because they're salty former USAID recipients. Like, we know Bill Kristol was. We know Bill Kristol was I think he was getting money from the IRI or one of these outfits, right? And right. I really wonder where the Lincoln Project money comes from. I'm sure the Bulwark has outside funding. And, I know for a fact from people that are familiar with what's going on inside this, the Beltway, is that a lot of these people turned super anti-Trump when they backed the wrong Republican in the 2016 primary and then got shut out, rightly so. And so that's what happens in D.C. They all just want to, the gravy train, the spice must flow, basically, and they'll do whatever and say whatever in order to do that. It's really disgusting.
Yeah, it's just the nature of politics that I also think to the question of sort of the rhinos, like the Bill Kristol crowd, if you can even call him a rhino anymore, he's more like a Dem, but that's it. Remember all of the 2015 from the golden escalator moment with Trump and Melania forward, it was just a screaming joke for a year from June to June. It was the late night jokes. Remember that clip with Ann Coulter, and she was on Maher's show, and he said, who do you think? And she's like, of the declared candidates, Donald Trump. And everybody just blew up laughing and, pounding the doors down, knee slapping and the whole bit. And hey, well, that's exactly how it turned out. The question was, who's going to get the GOP nomination? And that was a year before. That was in June of 2015, not 16. He didn't pretty much clear the field. Although it was heading that way, he didn't clear the fields until almost a year later and get rid of everybody, Ted Cruz and what did he call Jeb Bush, Fireball or Mr. Electric or whatever.
You're kind of selling it short. If you want to paint a picture this way, it's that they have been playing a color revolution playbook on America, essentially, and have waged psychological warfare for almost a decade, and they've used almost every op they have in the book. Like you said, first they tried to ridicule Donald Trump, then they turned to opposition research. Then they created a hoax to impeach him over, created a special prosecutor, undermined, essentially a treasonous sedition, a coup, right? Then they
Yeah.
started to use the racism thing. It didn't really work. I mean, it worked in the beginning, and then people were like, wait a minute, I don't mind being called racist again. Then they called him Hitler. Then they literally tried to convict him. He got shot at. They went after all of his supporters. They've done literally everything on earth. And the fact that he still won the election, despite all the cheating and despite all of the way that the Democrats are just pumping probably foreign donations through this massive machine, still today, the tap has not been shut off. And people will talk about how, oh, the DNC's got a record bad fundraising haul compared to the RNC. Yeah, okay, but Act Blue raised 400 million last quarter, and they're going to keep doing it until they're thrown in jail. And so all of that has been levied against the American people. And Donald Trump still came out on top. The level of optimism coming into his second term was just breathtaking, where he came in with, granted,
Yeah.
not a very big honeymoon because of the state of politics, but with record right direction polling and a strong majority saying that he was going to bring a new golden age to America. And those numbers were very resilient, unfortunately, up until, again, right about the July 4th weekend. And I think part of it was a bill, part of it was dalliances in the Middle East, and part of it was a complete mishandling of the Epstein thing that's going to be a drag on him for a long time still, unless he. And you could say, oh, the right's put it in the rearview mirror. But if you go to places like the echo chambers of the left, like Reddit Politics, half the posts are still about Epstein. They really are. And if you look at where everybody's, more people are searching the term on Google Epstein right now than they are Obama or Clinton. And those were two former presidents or presidential candidates. So
Yeah.
that's really wild. And if you look at where the places are that people are searching most, it's like Oregon, Colorado, Minnesota, Vermont. It's like every left-wing haven, California. Everybody's like, what's going on with the Epstein case? So this is driving them right now. And you almost can feel it shifting too. Um, I don't know if we want to go there yet, but it's turning into a big fight. The Republicans, in my opinion, are failing and have let the American people down and are not doing the things they need to do to buck the historical trend that says you're going to lose the House. And they're down in the generic ballot. So the polling says they're going to lose the House, and they need to pull
So
something
let me
really.
stop right there, Mark, if I can. So what should the Republicans be doing? I know there's an awful lot of talk, at least in the social media world, that this is garbage. Why in the hell are you on recess? Why aren't you confirming these nominees? Is that something the country cares about? Or is that something that, again, just sort of like the left wing has their echo chamber, here's the right wing echo chamber. I mean, I don't mean to diminish the issue. These nominees do need to get passed. That's not the point. The point is this something that changes the numbers? I mean, what is it the Republicans the congressional Republicans need to do in order to stop the kind of tiny little slide that's going on here?
Well, it's a 7-point slide, which is pretty big, right? Like it shouldn't be. The Republicans should be up if they took the House in the fall and Donald Trump has had a lot of wins. They should be. The polling should not have dropped. And so again, if they pull out a positive, it doesn't necessarily mean there's going to be House pickups. There's a lot of stuff that goes into this, right? Extra counting and illegals that have motor voter and all this stuff with redistricting. But who are Republicans and what are they doing? Well, Trump, his legacy will be diminished if he loses the House in the fall. His legislative agenda will be gone. They'll try and impeach him again. There will be all of these show trials, right? So he has a plan, and apparently he's working with people to try and back the right candidates, and he's going to go on a stump and try and raise money for these people and support them with even more rallies. And that's his plan. And maybe it'll work, but it will be a thing where it's like, oh, we're going to target just what we need to and pull out the slimmest margin, maybe, right?
Yeah.
Then you have, okay, well, what about the Republican establishment, the RNC, the RNCC, the NRSC, all these people, well, they're still raising money off the Trump name and then very cynically shutting out most MAGA candidates and making sure that a squishy moderate is run because they don't believe in Trumpism. And mostly the money is getting allocated to their friends and buddies in the consulting industries because there's vendor kickback schemes and nods and winks all over the place. So that's what the Republican establishment's doing. Then you do have some MAGA candidates who are running to try and primary rhinos, but every once in a while, like I can tell you, they're having a hard time getting through to people that can give them money or support or national recognition. And oftentimes what happens is Donald Trump's not going to back those people because they can't raise money, or because some little snake in the establishment has said, no, this is the true MAGA candidate. And it's somebody that has an F- Liberty score or something like that, right? So that stuff's happening. Then it's like, okay, well, committee heads, you have people like Comer, who is rightly subpoenaing all these people, but he's just one Republican, right? And I guess he has some support. Then it's like, okay, well, the Freedom Caucus, like, I don't know. I haven't heard really anything about them. Okay, so like John Thune and Mike Johnson. They've passed basically nothing. They had the one big beautiful bill and like three other things that matter. Basically nothing. Okay. Mike Johnson, I haven't heard him say crap. You know, back in November of 24, he stood outside of Congress and said they're going to raise an America First banner over the halls of Congress. And then he's going on to have the lowest days in session, the lowest legislative output, when essentially Trump had a mandate, at least from a perspective of his agenda. And so they've been a complete and utter failure. Not only that, I hear them talking about their 26th legislative agenda, and yet they still have a year left on this one. So they're not doing anything. And now my question is it because Thune and Mike Johnson are really, really that bad? Or is it because the way that legislation is decided in the Republican Party, I mean, essentially is just part of the uniparty taxpayer milking scheme? And I think that's what the answer is, because that one big beautiful bill was basically regular DC uniparty garbage with a thin veneer of Trumpism slapped on it, in my personal opinion, right? And so who wrote that? Why did they run Elon Musk, the biggest gift to the Republican Party, off into a ditch to pass their garbage DC pork barrel bill that nobody really liked? I mean, it was net +5 when asked to approve or disapprove. But a lot of people will just say, oh, look, Congress passed a bill. We're happy to see something happen. And when we asked whether it cut enough out of the deficit, people are like, no. And people are mixed on like what the actual benefit of the bill is. And his numbers plunged when it was signed. They didn't go up. And so what are they going to do? What are they, the Republicans? And I mean the K Street interests that back the people that write these things and decide what's going to get signed into law. And in my opinion, the answer is absolutely nothing. And that's sad because Americans want a government that can function for their interests. And Republicans are showing that even though people took a flyer on them, I think a lot of Republican votes came from people who were Democrats and independents and just thought Trump needed Republicans backing him. And now they're looking, and I have polling that shows this. Only 38% of Trump 2024 voters have a very favorable impression of the Republican Party. Meanwhile, Donald Trump has a 60% strong approve rating among Republican voters. So
let me ask you this question. Obviously, I mean, you know, your numbers and even just the sense of, you know, kind of like walking around out on the street and talking to people and stuff. Yeah, Trump's a Republican, but there's a clear division between Republican leadership and Trump himself. Don't the Republican leadership members, don't they look at these numbers? Don't they say, wow, they like him and they only like us to the degree that there's a little bit of a glow from him that gets onto us? But aside from that, they think we're just the usual shysters in D.C. and not really that different from the Democrats. Doesn't that concern them?
I don't think so.
Why not? I mean, it seems so self-motivated, so anti-self-interest. Like you want to arrange things in such a way that you lose power or control or, you know, committee chairmanships and all of that stuff. Really? And you don't care because what? You're just still going to your same donors, and now you get to write an email that says, oh my God, we have to win in 2028 and give us $5 billion trillion. Is that all this is?
I'm not a DC insider and I hate going there, but I feel duty bound to try and understand this issue with very fine nuance because most people who talk about this, as you know, they do not. They'll basically paint with a very broad brush and say things like the Republicans are controlled opposition. Well, that isn't true. The Republican is a big, vast, dynamic, complex machine made out of hundreds of thousands of workers and volunteers. People who have been there, spread across probably 25 different entities, not even counting the thought leadership infrastructure and all the foundations and the way the money gets allocated through the donor networks. It's very complex. Based on my discussions and my observations, I think that most Republican legislators are probably minimally corrupted, although many of them probably have some ties or hair on them, right? Like some things that have happened, right? That they
Sure.
don't want to come out. But I think most of them operate independently with what they think is values, but they don't have a support infrastructure. They're trying to do actually what I think you'd expect a congressman to do in a representative democracy, which is represent their, district's constituents as best as possible, making decisions about what legislation to sign, what to support, and what to talk about. But you can see from their interviews, they're all pushing on their own individual little boulder. It
Right.
doesn't the force and effect is not multiplied, right? And I went to some of these congressional staff offices. The staffers all look the same, no matter if you went to a Democrat or Republican. They're all, 25-year-old Georgetown graduates, interchangeable. The same stack of newspapers is on the same table in every single office. The Hill, Politico, Washington Post, and Washington Times, right? Like basically, and they don't really actively engage in public opinion stuff. They don't understand the polls. They don't have anybody explaining it to them. They don't come and seek out stuff from me at all. And I think that, the idea that think tanks actually do like good faith public opinion research is kind of gone. I think they're all basically just, I think they're basically like grift implant devices, is basically what, think tanks have turned into. And so on the Republican side, you might get people like Mike Johnson who are put in leadership position, but they live in a very confined bubble where they have very little influence and very little perspective of the world abroad. And so I think it's easy to convince themselves they're doing a good job. And it's also easy to convince themselves that within the constraints they're given, they're doing the best possible. And you can see it the way Mike Johnson talks. He's an utter colossal failure from an objective perspective of moving forward pro-Trump legislation, and yet he's probably doing the best job he can. He was probably handed that 3,000-page bill and just said, like, Trump wants this passed, do your best, get as much stuff in it as possible. And is that his fault? So I think what happens is you have this power vacuum where because they don't the right doesn't have this very Machiavellian feedback mechanism loop that the Democrats have. If you don't toe
Yeah.
the line, you will either get beaten with a stick or they'll, bribe you with bricks of gold in your refrigerator if you do the right thing. The Republicans, it's not like that. And so there's these people who I think either convince themselves they're doing a good job or just very cynically saying, well, we're in power. We're going to do what we think we need to stay in power. And usually that's establishment stuff, which is make K Street happy, make all your corporate backers happy so you can get reelected. It's really, I think, that simple. And so I think America wants to see that change. We've asked questions. Overwhelmingly, people say they want massive change in Washington, D.C. instead of business as usual. And it's like, okay, obviously that's going to win by like 60 points, and it does. It's like 80-20, right? But
Sure.
then look at the big beautiful bill. Is that business as usual in Washington, D.C.? I think quite clearly it is. And so that's my advice to them. You have to change that. And Trump's maybe doing it with arrests. Arrests are popular. That's a 70% position. And I think, they could easily pass one-page bills every week. They
Yeah.
could just get rid of the Senate filibuster and just give America voter ID tomorrow, and then give America something else the next week. That would get to the headlines, that would
I've
make
always
news.
been curious, suspicious would be a better way to put it. I've always been suspicious why that doesn't happen. Why does everything have to get crammed into these 797,000 page bills and some point down the road 8 years from now, it's like, oh, well, that was the law. They passed that law back in whenever. But, why can't you just, as you say, here's one page, put on here, every voter who votes in any federal election, for any federal office or candidate, must check, 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 check. One vote, you prove your ID, here's your photo, American citizen, and that's it. And I know you got to sometimes write a little legal language into something to, define what a word might mean, but the issue should be just one straight up issue. Do they not do that because it's really hard to smuggle pork into that?
Yes. Let's be clear. I could go on Grok right now and say, give me 50 popular one-page bills that give America something very specific that polls positively. And it'll do them. It'll literally write the bill. It will write a bill. And I asked Matt Gaetz on his show, and what he basically said is, well, yeah, they can't pack all this opaque garbage into it. Basically, the machine can't grease its beak or, grease its paw. That's what it is. It really comes down to they can't pay themselves. They can't make the establishment happy. They can't satisfy Big Pharma. They can't satisfy Cargill without being able to just hide all this garbage in there.
Since everybody who's would be the agent of change are already part of that system, realistically, what sort of sense of that ever changing of that system? Because it's really corrupt. I mean, maybe it's not as evil and rotten as horrible as the Democrats, but it's still corrupt.
This is the problem. I think a lot of people thought, well, Trump can write this shit. He can save the future of the republic. And I don't think that's the case. I really don't. Because already they're trying to, he did a pretty good job in July of destroying some of his own political capital. But the establishment Republicans are just drooling over the idea that MAGA is on its last days. And it really will. If Trump loses 2026 midterms, that's it. You're not going to be talking about MAGA. And already you see Daily Mail floating trial balloons about Rubio and stuff like that. They really breathlessly want some, and maybe Rubio's doing great, but let's acknowledge that he has ties to the establishment. He's been a senator forever, right? He's got big donors who back him. He's got special interests, and maybe he deals with them with finesse and integrity. I don't know. But breathlessly reporting that he might be a new surprise contender. And then they cite an Emerson poll, which is good, in North Carolina, that has J.D. Vance up on Marco Rubio 53% to 5%, and DeSantis only pulls a 7%. This is the same DeSantis that establishment billionaires threw $300 million at to try and take out Trump while he was being, convicted as a political, and so the establishment desperately wants to peel away from MAGA. And that's because they don't care about the voter. And MAGA is about the voter. It's about economic populism. And J.D. Vance knows that. And he's the heir apparent right now. Imagine that. Yeah. Somebody who people think are going to represent them is popular. And so they're going to continue this fight. And like you said, the machine is really good at matriculating new people that get down there. They either, I've talked to some of the really good ones. I talked to Tim Burchett, and he's trying to do his best. But it's a grind, man. It wears down on people not being able to change it and seeing all these votes go the wrong way and not quite frankly, not being put in an opportunity where they can even make a consequential vote for America. That's the real problem. Yeah. Is that individually they need to operate as a team, and the people in charge don't see the benefit in that because they can't get as wealthy. So what you had going into this election was 43% of America who thought a civil war was likely in the next few years. A majority of people thinking there would be a violent reaction to the outcome of this election, regardless of who won. So these are very bad signs. And I think people really chilled out. Right direction came up to record highs once Trump got in. But I think people are going to realize that Trump isn't enough to fix the system. And unfortunately, we're marching towards inflationary debt spiral that's going to probably destroy our economy. And every institution has been corrupted. And how could Donald Trump, quite frankly, really possibly fix that? He could change a few things, maybe kick the can. But ultimately, we have a representative democracy where the voters aren't represented. And I think history will tell us that leads to revolution. And I think these pressures have not been fully alleviated, because what you have now is, okay, well, legislators aren't giving Americans what they want. But I think we have an existential election. I hate to keep calling them that, an existential election coming up. And the Democrats realize that it's existential for them as well.
Sure.
And so what is their solution? Well, they're going to redistrict. They're going to gerrymander the hell out of every state that they can. And all of a sudden, Democrats are trying to convince their followers that they've never done that themselves. Yeah. And you have Barack Obama himself opining on this. The same week we heard about, criminal accountability potentially coming for him, right?
Yeah.
So this is going to be, I think, the fight in September. This, looking at what happens in Texas, a desperate attempt to squeeze out every House vote that each side can have, basically, complete congressional Armageddon. And I don't know how it's going to go, but it's a big deal. And they're willing to break the rules. They're willing to be criminals to win.
I do think here a good example, obviously, is Texas on this redistricting thing. Every time you look at the Democratic Party is very easy to look at monolithically. I mean, obviously, there's nuances in there. But I should say it's much more easy to look at the Democratic Party monolith because they sort of behave in a monolithic fashion. They always have. The Republican thing always has this, well, what about this? And twist, and I need to, we got to do a quarter of this and maybe a third of that. And, well, we got to keep John over there happy and Susie doesn't feel, her parts are big. It's this constant, committee to make a horse winds up, creating an elephant or whatever that old saying is. And here in Texas, I'm like, well, this is a little surprising that part of the Republican establishment wants Trump to disappear after 2028, and the long, slow march out would be losing the 2026 midterms. And yet, Trump says, hey, Texas, you could redistrict stuff down there based on that court order. I think it was the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals saying, hey, your map is not accurate. And Abbott jumps in, is like, yep, let's do this, special session. Now we have the drama, Democrats have run off and, they're going to get arrested by the FBI and all state Democratic lawmakers I'm talking about, as opposed to the federal guys who are going to get indicted by the grand jury. It's a different story. There really isn't a method by which Democrats can gerrymander anymore because they've already done it. I mean, and they have processes in place. It's a massively complex thing for those blue states to gerrymander. Like, for example, Trump had some interview with CNBC the other day, and he was saying, "Hey, I got 41% of the vote in Massachusetts, for example." That doesn't necessarily mean that 41% of the congressional delegation needs to be Republican. But 100% of the congressional delegation of Massachusetts is Democrat. How is that fair? So if Massachusetts, for example, wanted to gerrymander, there's nothing to gerrymander. They already have 100% of the seats. Same thing with Illinois, that big giant finger thing, going across their congressional map, from one side of the state to the other. It's, of 190 mile wide and 3/4 of an inch, tall. And that's a district. It's the only thing the Republicans have. So it's interesting that this would start getting pursued. I mean, Texas is kind of known partially in its politics for these special sessions called by the governor to get crap, get your crap together here, fellas. But that seems to me to be we're going to hold on to Congress come hell or high water. And maybe that's just a faction within the Republican circles, but I think that's really what it is. Here in Texas, I'm hearing there's nothing that's going to stop this. It's not going to happen. Meaning the Democrats plan to stop this, maybe slow it down. But when this session ends, Abbott just calls another. So it's happening, and there's going to be a shift to 5 seats. And maybe Jasmine Crockett actually is going to get out gerrymandered, kicked out because of the new map. Well, wouldn't that
the Democrats awful? Are probably going to be happy about that one. They're going to be like, okay, probably there's your gimme.
But what do you think of that? I mean, why would there be this effort within some part of the Republican Party? Okay, it's here in Texas, to make this push to hold on. Ultimately, it causes the ability to hold on to Congress to increase on the part of the Republicans.
Yeah, I don't know why all of a sudden Texas bucked up. And it might be because Abbott is close with Trump and this is what the White House wants. Maybe it's because, I really don't know. And I think they're serious about it. Certainly Ken Paxton is, the way he talks about it.
Oh, yeah.
But the problem is that, again, this isn't like the win. This isn't necessarily the win, because California can redistrict and get another 5 Democrats. And now you have Gavin Newsom out there talking about how he could potentially remove all Republican representation from Congress. And this is a state that I think Trump won by over 40 points. Certainly 38% tried to recall Gavin Newsom in 2021. So for 40% of their state to not have any representation in Congress by party is kind of strange, right? Like, that's a little bit of an outlier. But he's willing to go there, and the media is talking him up as some kind of new resistance leader because of it. And there was a really fascinating article I read on my stream last night from Axios. I don't know this guy, Zachary Basu or something. But Axios it probably got ties to our intel. I mean, it certainly leaked that DOJ thing, a few weeks ago. That Pam Bondi said the Epstein case was, I don't know. I think that, like, we all know the Democrats get their 4 a.m. talking points. We all know that the dissent is brutally punished, and that's one of the reasons why they're so ubiquitous and why every single lowest common denominator, super lefty, progressive talking point becomes party dogma. But the words here used in this article are really incredible. Democrats go nuclear in redistricting arms race. They talk about counter-offensive, and they frame people as fighters or folders, and that if the Democrats are folders, they're not going to carry the torch of leadership into 2028. Kathy Hochul is quoted as saying, "This is a war. We're at war." It goes on and on and on. The amount of belligerent words used in this article about this Texas redistricting thing are really, really big, and they're trying to paint people who are opposing it as leaders. And even all of the framing that I've seen in the media is absolutely crazy. It's like, okay, so Texas is following their constitution and their law to redistrict. Okay? And then the Democrats.
And the federal court ruling, which said their current congressional map is out of whack.
Yeah. So then Democrats are breaking the rules by not allowing a quorum and skipping the state, right?
Right.
And then so you have like Obama and Gavin Newsom say, well, we're not going to let Republicans break the rules. When Republicans are trying to do what Democrats have done for decades.
Right.
Like, the way it's being framed is just so patently gaslighting. And, it's a complex situation, and it's going to heat up.
Well, I was having a conversation with Jim Ellis. He's another one of our frequent guests on here, and he's kind of had his head in, yes, Republican politics and Republican candidates and all that, and policy and everything. But he always relates to that from kind of a 60,000-foot point of view of just politics. And, he even said, could it happen in California? Could Gavin Newsom do what you just said on a blackboard in a college classroom? In theory, yeah. But California is one of those states that has those commissions, and the commissions would have to be voted out of existence by voters. So when's that vote going to happen? Because they were voted into existence by voters, and the commission is the thing that, a lot is like the first hurdle to get past. Like California, Colorado, even New York have these things in place.
Yeah.
I mean, they gerrymandered, and then they said, here we go, slamming on the brakes, and you can't touch the map anymore. Well, now that's coming back to bite them. They put all these roadblocks up, and now they're trying to, what do they say in when you're returning a rental car? As soon as you drive over those spikes, don't back up.
Yeah.
in the return parking lot. Well, that's kind of what the Democrats are running into here. Can it happen? Sure. But there's a lot more room for gerrymandering in red states than there are in blue states. I can't remember what his analysis was, but if everybody gerrymandered, and if you got 38% of your state is this party, and you realign your congressional delegation to be 38% for that party, the Democrats would get completely screwed. if that happened. And they don't have anywhere near the ceiling to be able to do the changes they're, blathering on about and bloviating about like Republicans would.
You say 60,000 feet, and I like let's do that. The Democrats probably stole about 16 seats from the Republicans with the 2020 census that included illegal aliens, right? So there is that. And then my understanding is that Trump has at least talked about some type of process to try to claw the 2020 census back.
Correct.
I don't know where it's at. I know that Seth Keshel probably knows a lot more about that than me. But what we're talking about here is a battle of politics. Sure. This is not the way that legislative bodies are supposed to operate. And so the voters are not getting, served. And it looks like the next year and a half is going to literally be this nail-biting, literally conflict where they try to outmaneuver each other. And I don't quite frankly like the Republicans' chances in that, given their perennial lack of spine. But it doesn't serve the voters, because this is essentially legislators choosing their voters and not voters choosing their legislators.
Exactly.
But also, look, we just talked about a very simple solution that the Republicans could do tomorrow. They could literally just give Americans a bunch of really popular, simple bills that give them massive wins and headlines all the way between now and November. They could do it tomorrow, and they won't. And so this is the state of our republic. And quite frankly, voters would be right to revolt over something like this. They're just not it hasn't been painful enough, I guess. That's the problem.
If we can, let me switch back to what we were talking about here, which is we spent a lot of time talking about the Republicans, but I want to pivot back to this article in Unheard and by Richard Hanania, however you say his name. It's fundamental. I want to read one line from it, because he goes on to say, hey, you're seeing all these headlines that Democrats suck and we're done and we're over with and all of that. Anyway, he reaches a conclusion and he says this, and I'd like your response to this. The Republican advantage, then, seems mostly or completely driven by very liberal voters not liking the current Democratic Party. Does that mean in order to match Republicans in popularity, all Democrats would have to do is move left? Unfortunately for them, surveys indicate that their voters would like them to do precisely the opposite. That strikes me as kind of a contradictory, two contradictory statements there. The people that don't like you, that are driving your numbers down to whatever extent they're being driven down, are your really wild liberal voters. And so instead of racing there, the answer should be, no, move over here to the left, is what some of the other voters say. Well, I think at that point you would just freeze these guys out. They're not going to go vote for Trump or Vance in the future or anything else. They're just not going to vote for you at all. They just won't vote.
I didn't read all of his drivel, but it kind of strikes me as somebody that's trying to use a bare modicum of logic to basically write something that's a headline he was told to write to get a paycheck, I'm guessing, and who knows where that paycheck's coming from. But the premise is first needs to be rejected that Democrats are wildly unpopular. They're not. They have a very slight brand disadvantage to Republicans right now. And quite frankly, on a lot of surprise issues, they're leading Republicans. And it's because I think a lot of people are upset with what they've seen out of Republicans. We had 60% of Republicans agree that Republicans in Congress had not delivered on the mandate that Donald Trump was given. And so Republicans might have a slight edge, but on things like election integrity, Democrats are winning now by 2 points. They're winning by 4 in the generic ballot. And then just looking back at what happened during Biden is you had all these people that would strongly approve of Biden no matter what he did. Yeah. That's your core radical leftists. They're going to vote for Democrats. And they're still in the polls saying they're going to vote for Democrats. Sure. I don't know how Quinnipiac got them to say otherwise, but I'm telling you right now in my polling, they still very strongly support Democrats. So the problem is this fluff in the middle of people who will just vote for the Mets or Yankees. There's a lot of that. There's people who will just not vote because they're pissed off. There's people who gave Republicans a chance and are now mad and moving back. And there's people now who were still Democrats and now like some of the stuff that Trump did who may now vote for Republicans. But I think there's fewer of them than people who were turned off by how this administration is now going because we only had Democrats winning by 1 point on the generic ballot 2 or 3 months ago. So the number is dropping. Now, it is also true that a majority of Democrat voters want the party to be more moderate. We've seen that all the time.
Yeah.
We've seen the crazy leftists say, no, Chuck Schumer's head's got to roll. And then I go out into the field and it's like, no, actually, he's got a pretty high approval rating among Democrats, and a majority of them want him to stay and think that he's valuable. So the problem is that their leftist and most crazy voices are filling a vacuum now in national leadership. I think part of it, you have the social media landscape is, I think, driving a lot of this. Because remember back during the debt ceiling fight, you heard a lot about Chuck Schumer.
Yeah.
You haven't really heard a lot about that guy. He just sort of disappeared. Well, he was out trying to be a leader, and he was getting brutally ratioed on social media. And then his own party wanted to fire him, and then he kind of retracted into himself. So you're seeing this like new layer of people who are fighting to be relevant, and they're doing it by being the biggest resistors because that gives them a social media boost, but it loses them voters and makes their voters peel away. That's why Kamala Harris lost, is because of what Biden did to the Democrat Party. The Democrat Party, quite frankly, should have won that if Joe Biden had just not packed this administration full of criminals and retarded leftists. And that's what he did. And I'm being a little glib, but that's like basically what happened. You had people in there just blazing off pardons left and right and going after their political opponents and selling pardons or whatever. They're like just wild stuff. So they are certainly in a bad spot in identification of themselves and having a platform that can compete with MAGA. But like we talked about, Republicans are tripping over themselves to get rid of MAGA.
Yeah,
they're like their biggest advantage, and the Democrats didn't go away. You didn't have, probably about 5 million Democrats turned out for 2020 because of the Kumbaya stuff and the mass formation, and they're gone. They didn't come out for Kamala Harris, but it's like the other 75 million, they're not going away. They're still going to turn out. They're high propensity voters. It's the Republican coalition that's a bunch of people who are like, they had to get a babysitter to go vote, or they were taking a chance and voting in contrary to what their union told them to, or like all of these reasons, or they hate the social positions of the Republicans, but they're just so desperate to put food on their table. And those people will not turn out in 26. They're just not going to. And so I don't know what his ultimate goal or point in this. It just sounds like one more of those voices trying to redefine the Democrat Party in some new way. And I guess they need it. And it's like that's the thing. We know that they will cherry pick poll numbers. I show Democrats with a 47% favorability rating. Not a single Democrat outfit has run with that number. So I don't know. One of the most accurate pollsters from 2024 say, no, Democrats are actually doing pretty well, almost as good as Republicans, and they're leading in the generic ballot. That was not a Washington Post headline. It wasn't, so they're doing this to themselves on purpose, quoting literally the worst pollster to write articles about how the party, whether it should go right or left. It needs to become less insane. And right now, none of the voices I'm hearing are talking about that.
Yeah, I mean, when you've got people like, Mamdani, for example, and what's his face, that weird little freak in Minneapolis, mayor position, that's where that guy looks like a Somalian pirate. The mayor of Minneapolis.
I can only surmise that this is what the donors want, and by donors, I mean probably China.
Yeah. Where do you put the threat from China in relation to our elections? I mean, I know they're a regular daily threat with you name it. I mean, the imports of everything from here to, whatever thing you can think of, it's made in China. I remember back in the 70s when I was a kid, everything had made in Japan stamped on the bottom of it. I haven't seen a made in Japan, I don't remember since when, but everything, China. Where do you put the threat of them in the elections? I don't mean necessarily an election night going in, wiring machines and changing vote tallies and all of that. I'm just talking about sort of in the general splay of all of this as it runs up, because politics never stops. There's just highlight moments called elections. What where do you think China's influence is most readily felt in the elections, in politics? Sorry.
Well, I don't want to get into a complex discussion about election integrity. And quite frankly, I believe that our elections are fraudulent in many ways. And I think there's cheating on both sides, too. And there's certainly a lot of cheating by Republicans to cover up cheating by Democrats, which is also kind of weird. The way that they'll shut down investigations and strip people of positions just to make sure this stuff gets buried.
Yeah.
I also firmly believe that the election was stolen from Donald Trump in 2020 by significant cheating in the swing states, but marginal cheating. I also think there was a lot of national cheating from mail-in ballots, but I also think that Joe Biden turned out more voters than any other Democrat president. I think both things can be true. And I think the polling showed that Donald Trump was going to lose the national popular vote. I think that was the case. I think there was a very COVID mass formation driven response bias of new voters that came out to support the establishment in a crisis. And so it's tough to know where, I mean, there's a lot of things that don't make sense, like Venezuelan owned election machines and, you know, reports from the CIA that never saw the light of day that accused China of like lots of stuff that I just don't have enough information to answer, nor does America, quite frankly. And we need to figure that stuff out. Because trust in elections, we got up to 66% of people who thought the outcome of this election was going to be affected by cheating. That's really, really, really bad. That's like third world bad. People don't trust the elections.
Sure.
And as we know, it matches the fact that only 30% trust our federal government. And so we have crumbling institutional trust.
Wow, it's that high? Really? 30% trust the federal government?
Well, you know, you still see people in N95s, right? So not 30% of them, but I'm just explaining the mechanism, right? They worship MSNBC, right? They make money from the government. They work in a corporation that is best served by being, you know, by feeding into crony capitalism. Like all of these mechanisms create people who have strong trust in the government, just not everybody, right?
Sure. Fair points.
So what I can tell you, too, is that Americans are smarter on China than our elected officials are. We've been asking a question, is China an ally or an enemy or somewhere in between for like decades now? And it was always like low percent ally, you know, 15, 20, 25, but also low percent enemy. And that number has been ticking up. Even before Trump started his first term, we got up to almost 50% of Americans saying China is an enemy. And now reliably, that number is 50%. Now, during the Biden administration, we started asking a new question. Who's America's biggest enemy today? China wins. It's like 30 couple percent China, followed by, you know, 20 couple percent Russia, followed by Iran, North Korea, single digits, right?
Sure.
So Americans say that China is our biggest enemy, especially Republicans and independents who say it by majorities. Now, what we added, though, to that question was the Democrat and the Republican Party. And so now the Democrat Party is America's biggest enemy, followed by the Republican Party, followed by China.
Wow.
And so the real problem is that people know there's an issue with China. Politicians don't address it. Trump hasn't really been wailing on China recently. And quite frankly, we have a dirty room that we have to clean up.
Sure.
And that's, I think, been a huge opportunity for China, who's waging fifth generation asymmetrical warfare on them. I think I had a Chinese spy in my business school learning team. And I think that they probably have assets all over every corporation and institution in America. And I think they've completely destroyed the fabric of our society.
Well, not yours and not ours. I can promise you that.
Yeah, well, there's only 4 of us. So it's like we would know which one's the Chinese spy. But
yeah, pretty much.
But, you know, it's not being addressed. I think people are concerned about China, but I think they're concerned more about other things. And they're concerned about the current state of the economy, whereas, you know, we hear numbers that just say that the American dream's dead. Only 22% of today's children will live better than their parents. This is all uniparty globalism, offshoring, the fact that literally everything you get from Amazon and Walmart comes from China now. And you can't go out to a shopping mall because it's been completely destroyed. You know, the fact that we have this monetary system that China now, We turns out that China has people embedded in the Federal Reserve potentially. I heard a report Natalie Winters was saying. Yeah. It's like this is the same Federal Reserve that's fighting Trump on monetary policy. And it's also the same financial markets that doesn't allow massive corporations who benefit from China to fail. That's the other problem. We've lost economic creative destruction. There's a lot of stagnation, a reduction in velocity, and a concentration of wealth and power at the top. All of this stuff suits China. Yeah, and so that's kind of weird. It's like everything that happens serves China's best interest.
Yeah.
Us warring over our own redistricting instead of our legislative body passing laws that help America, that serves China.
Sure, of course it does. Yeah. I mean, particularly if you get 5 new seats and then the Chinese swoop in and buy them off, so to speak.
Yeah, exactly. With potentially, NGO money funneled through Act Blue, I don't know. Or maybe, somebody got to Mitch McConnell and said, hey, the IRI money's got to go to this guy instead. Like, I don't know. But it's probably stuff like that because it's real easy because these people are very corruptible. That's the problem. And so it's like everything says these problems are going to persist. And Trump is, I think, doing a great service of teaching America how corrupt the whole system is.
Correct.
But that doesn't restore institutional trust. It makes it worse. Like that's the problem. We're about to prove to America that there was a coup, that a former president conducted a coup on his political opponent. How do you make that improve like the feeling of trust in our institutions?
Yeah, I mean, I think the thought is probably, kind of a two-pronged fork here. One is, these bastards need to pay for what they did, just a question of justice. And also over here, hey, dudes, here's a wake-up call that this could actually happen. You need to get off your, put down your freaking, game station or whatever the hell is your OnlyFans or whatever the hell you're involved in, and you need to get your butt in gear because this happened. And by the way, here's the jail sentences to prove it. But we'll see how that goes. But Mark, we only got a couple minutes left, and I want to kind of come back to what we started with and just sort of the question of polling itself. Even Dick Hananea here says, issue polling is, in short, a mess. Although we can draw broad lessons about which party owns specific policy areas, I'd be hesitant to draw any kinds of inferences regarding changes and all that and everything. So even he admits, which is kind of funny, he spends like 10 paragraphs, polling, this, that, oh, look what it is, and by the way, polling's a mess, we don't really know what the hell's going on. Well, I'm like, why are you quoting the polls then? But, so sort of 2 questions for you. What are the challenges, just as a pollster and one of the premier pollsters, what are the challenges of polling today, and how do you and the other 3 guys in the group, how do you overcome those challenges and get your more truthful representative numbers?
This is actually really, really simple answer. It's called intellectual honesty. That's really the secret sauce. It really is. So polling is becoming more difficult. People don't respond to polls as readily. You can't landline robodial people under 50. There just aren't any. People have been trained that most people that call their cell phones are scammers, and that's super expensive. And so a lot of us people, honest polling doesn't make money. It just doesn't. All the money is in manipulating opinion. And so there's methodologies that I would love to do to get more samples, and I just can't do it because it's way too expensive for us. So I do what has worked for us, which is I robodial as many people as I can. Most of them are over 50. And then we go to online panels where people get paid to take surveys. And those people don't really match the electorate. They just don't. They'll say they'll turn out to vote. They probably won't, right? They're probably sitting at home in their PJs and they're just trying to make money, and then they're going to watch Netflix. And so it's still possible to predict elections by being smart enough to build a model of the electorate and to target the right people so that the number that you get at the end of the sausage machine matches the number that happens at the end of the other sausage machine, right? And it's just a matter of will. And what I've found talking to the other pollsters is they all do something different than I do. We all have our own methodology. We don't really talk about them. They all differ. And yet we still are able to get pretty accurate results. And so in my opinion, what it just comes down to is like we have this in entire kleptocracy, where it's very, very profitable to stay ideologically aligned to what keeps your pockets full of cash. And that also, for a lot of these people, we've had a postmodern war on logos, and people aren't willing to be intellectually honest. And so it's like, and I see this all the time, is that, well, like Trump just won an election, and one of his strongest issues was the border. Okay. We know he won the election. We know it was mostly because of the border, right? And then like 2 months later, you'll have ABC, Washington Post Ipsos, whatever, put out a poll that shows that Trump's underwater 10 points on the issue of immigration. Like, no, it's not. He just had a headline about how there were 0 border crossings. He's not underwater on immigration. So yes, issue polling is a complete mess. You have like us and Quinnipiac are almost 30 points apart on the One Big Beautiful Bill. A lot of it's how the questions asked. A lot of it's how they build the people that they target in their own proprietary panels. They don't want to be accurate. They want to shill for the establishment. Sure. Like, I understand them getting it wrong in 2016. I even understand them getting it wrong in 2020. But after those 2 cycles, if you still get it wrong, it's because you want to.
Yeah. No, yeah, it's kind of, I mean, the mood was just, 2024 was just, this is a Trump win. And, Biden sucks, and then Harris comes in and sure word salads, and, they had a little honeymoon for, 28 minutes after after her announcement. And yeah, I mean,
the registration data and the betting markets and the Real Clear Politics aggregate showed that Trump was going to win the Electoral College as early as, I think, October 20th.
Correct.
And yet every single mainstream pollster put out an electoral map that showed that Harris was winning. Every single one. And 538 and Nate Silver. Every single one.
Yep.
And Allen with the keys. Every single one.
It's amazing. It's amazing. They come around the next election cycle with the exact same thing, as though nobody remembers what happened in the last one. Anyway, Mark Mitchell, thank you very much, brother, for being on again. Great insights. Where can people go to find you, and how's the best way for them to support you?
This is going to be a really wild fall. We talk a lot about news, but from the framework of what is politically feasible because of public opinion. And as we've found, public opinion does not follow logic, right? So this is going to be a wild fall. I hope people follow us. We're going to be streaming Tuesday and Thursday nights at 9 p.m. at Rasmussen_poll on YouTube. And our Twitter accounts are Rasmussen_poll, and my account's Honest Pollster.
Excellent. And indeed you are. Mark, thank you very much for coming on. Appreciate it very much, brother. Thank you so much. Take care, man. God bless. And if you like these kinds of discussions and everything, please, come get on our page there. Hit that little donate button. Subscribe to our newsletter, and just stay in touch here. We have these great guests on who are really, really knowledgeable about everything. When we ask them something, and I've said it quite a few times. My mom had an old expression, an Irish expression, what that man doesn't know isn't worth knowing. And that's true of every single one of our guests that we bring on here. So please keep us active, come to us, read our articles, watch these interviews, learn, inform, educate, and then swing into action. Anyway, that's wrapping us up today here from our Souls and Liberty studio here in Houston, Texas. I'm Gary Michael Voris. God love you.